Hey, welcome to my channel where I talk about my dolls, and that's usually it. But in this video, I'm going to be dressing these dolls for Christmas while I tell some personal Christmas stories that, while they aren't all doll related, they are related to stories I've told on here in the past. And so they're sort of like extensions, Christmas chapters, if you will. And since I would imagine a lot of these videos aren't interesting for everyone to listen to, I should probably, in case you want to, turn down the volume and turn up the speed, tell you what dolls are up here and what I'll be changing them into. Over here we have Truly Me. They've all been, most of them have been rewigged. So if they don't look familiar, that's why. So Truly Me 124 over here. This is Truly Me 119. Truly Me 71. Tiana, who has just been rewigged, which is not Truly Me. Truly Me 77, and then Leah, obviously, at the end. And most of what you see up here will be Janie and Jack outfits. And then we've got like the Holiday Magic one here, and then the boy Christmas out from 2 years ago, I believe. So I think that's all I need to say before I get started. And so to anyone who has paid attention to my other videos or not, I will refresh the stories, because the first story I have to tell is kind of a correction of a story I told back in the summer when I was redressing my dolls for Pride Month. And I was explaining the experiences I had as a kid playing with dolls as a little boy. And in one of the stories, I remember the story a little bit differently. Even the story's not from my memory, but the way I remember my mom telling me the story growing up was different from how she explained it when I touched base with her, let's say, because I knew I was going to be telling the story. So I sort of asked her to refresh my memory. And the way she told me the story about when I was taken to the child psychologist was very different from what I remember her raising. She honestly told me that story so many times growing up. And the story that she told when I saw her in the summer was that my school was complaining that I was playing, hanging out with girls and playing with dolls. So they wanted me to go to a psychologist. But that's not how I remember the story. And I'm now going to tell the story how I remember it, because when I went to research some stuff for the Christmas story, I was like, I knew that wasn't the way the story went down. So what I remember growing up, because in that story, the way I told it, the way she suddenly told it to me back in the summer, was that it happened when I was maybe 6 or 7, so first or second grade. But I feel like if I had been that old, I would have remembered it a little bit more, but I have literally no memory of going through this. See, I always thought that I was younger, and that the reason we went is because I have an older brother. The reason we went to the child psychologist, I have an older brother, 5 years older. So when I was about 3 or 4, I would probably guess 4, he had what they considered a speech impediment. It turns out it was a hearing problem that he had, or he had to get like his adenoids taken out or something. But whatever it was, before they realized what his problem was with hearing, my mom had to take him to a psychologist. And one day, so again, this is how I remember the story being told to me, but it's different from how I told it back in my video back in June. So she had taken my brother to the psychologist, and while she was there, she was like, you know what, while we're here, might as well find out what's wrong with Blaine. So she talked to the therapist, who was a speech therapist. So I don't know what he had to do with child psychology aside from speech. And so what they did was they put me in a room. This is sort of a refresher part. They told me to go in this room and wait for them while they dealt with my brother. And I didn't explain this part clearly when I told the story, that when I went into this room, there was a two-way mirror in it. So I just thought I was going in and playing with dolls, or not playing with dolls. I thought I was going to go into this room that looked like any ordinary room. But what was happening was they were looking at me through outside the room. And when I went in, the refresher was, I went past all the boys' toys, like trucks and like G.I. Joes and things like that. And I was just like, ew, no, I don't want to play with that. But then I got to the dollhouse and my face lit up and I went running over, and my mom said to the therapist, like, did you see what's wrong with him? Why does he want to play with girls' things? And so now I really do believe I was like 4 years old when this happened, not 6 or 7. And the doctor luckily told her that there was nothing wrong with me. And, what did he said something like, he's not violent. Because my mom was convinced that I was jealous of my little sister, who was probably about a year old at this time. But he just said, no, it's perfectly natural. Let me play with the toys and no big deal. And the reason this relates to a Christmas story was because I remember that being the sort of catalyst as to my parents being okay with me playing with toys from that point on. And so after that happened, my parents eased up on me and started letting me play with My Little Ponies and, bought me my first doll. And so that Christmas, I remember being really young and getting what I wanted. There was this My Little Pony Princess Castle, I think it was called, or Dream Castle, that's what it was. And it came with a unicorn My Little Pony named Majesty, and it was the top of my wish list. But, my parents pretended like they still didn't want to get it for me because I was a boy. And so Christmas rolled around, and because of when this castle came out, I know that I was 4 years old. So when Christmas came around, we opened up all our gifts, and then I didn't get the Princess Castle. So then my dad, once everybody had opened all their gifts, pointed out another box that was under the tree, but it was addressed to my mom. So my mom was like, "Oh, Blaine, I'm tired. Can you open it for me?" And it was a really big box. So I thought, why would she want me to open her big? As your kid, you're always excited about the biggest packages. And so when I opened it, it was the My Little Pony Dream Castle. And my dad, I remember how excited my dad was. He was kind of bouncing up and down and going, like, why aren't you excited? Why aren't you excited? And my mom was like, "You confused him. He doesn't understand." And I was like, because I looked up and I said, "Why would Santa get you the Pony Princess Castle? You don't care about My Little Ponies." And, this was the top of my wish list. And so I guess what they would have thought would be this like this special treat and surprise was just something I was almost like, great, I wanted this and my mom got it. Because again, I was so young. So then they explained that it was mine. And so that was one of the stories I wanted to finish off because it was too much to tell when I told the story the last time. And it didn't really calculate in my mind anymore because my mom had convinced me. And I also want to say here that this is no disrespect. I mean, everybody gets older and our memories change, but there are often times that my sister and I will have conversations with my mom, and she'll remember something so differently from me, and I'll almost argue for a minute. I'll be like, "Why am I arguing with this? We just have different memories." And I'll say to my sister after, like, "You remember it the way I do, right?" And she'll be like, "Blaine, come on." She's, and that's why I'm saying I'm not making fun or disrespecting. I'm just saying, like, I have to try. I was still kind of learning this back when she told me that the story was that my teachers made me go to a child psychologist. And I'm sure my teachers did have problems, because I know they did. And I'm sure they probably said things like, "What's wrong with your son?" And she probably had that in her back pocket, that we took him to a child psychologist and the child psychologist said, "He's fine." Because, after, I remember the delays when I asked for dolls and stuff like that. I remember my mom trying to put it off and saying, "Next week, next week, next week." But I don't remember her saying you can't play with dolls because you're a boy. So after, like, as I was saying, after that, it was every Christmas I was able to get pretty much any My Little Pony thing that I wanted, because that was my big obsession, but any other dolls too. And another thing I learned when I got a bit older, this is a little off topic, but one thing I learned when I got older was whenever I liked a boy toy, see, here's the thing, I grew up in a family my mom was not a single mother, but she was the only one working for most of the time. And so we didn't have the means a lot of the year, but at Christmas they always made everything work. And then for if I see, my parents always wanted me to be a normal boy. Like, why don't you hang out with boys? Why don't you play with boy toys? So whenever I liked a boy toy, I remember there were Thundercats when I was a kid, and this cartoon called The Real Ghostbusters, based off of the movie The Ghostbusters. And whenever I wanted anything that was boy related, it didn't matter if it was Christmas or not. My dad would be like, "Oh, let's go get it." Let's run to what we had in the '80s called Zellers, but you don't have that. It's a Canadian store that closed down after Walmart took over. So yeah, those are kind of like the childhood stories that I could have finished off when I was doing that childhood experiences, but that video was already long. And then the next thing I wanted to flash forward a few years, when I was about 12. And I was talking about very recently, actually, when I opened my Moana doll and redressed her as Chili from TLC. I mentioned my obsession. Like, I was like, if they took me to a child psychologist for playing with dolls, I don't know why they didn't, when I was so overly obsessed with TLC. It was anyway, I mentioned in that video that I liked to dress like them, and they had this style of tucking their boots into their Dr. Martens, their shoes. And I wanted to do that so badly, but as I said, we didn't have the means most of the year, so my family couldn't have afforded docs. and it wasn't quite Christmas when I got obsessed. But I also had this two sets of friends. I had my friends at school, and I had my friends at. I had a best friend cousin who lived in another neighborhood, and so I could kind of brag. Okay, I was 12. Brag meaning lie, and say that I had that my mom had got me docs, and I was just like TLC. Again, this is how ridiculous I was, and she didn't believe me, rightfully so. And one day she was like, I was on the phone. We were on the phone with each other because we talked. We were really close. We were always on the phone if we weren't hanging out. And so one day we were talking, and she's like, "What color did you say your docs were?" And I was like, "Purple." Those are the docs I wanted the most, was the purple docs. And she's like, "Okay, cool. I'm gonna go ask your mom because she's over here right now. I'm gonna ask her if you have docs." And I was like, before I could even rebut or do anything, I was just like, "Oh," she put me on hold, and I hear her in the background calling my mom, and she was like, to her aunt, "Does Blaine have a pair of docs?" And my mom, MVP, without even being primed for this, was like, "Yeah, he has docs. I got him docs last month." And my cousin was like, "Oh, really? What color are they?" And my mom was like, "Purple." Okay, so it sounds like my mom is psychic or just the coolest mom ever. But the truth is, that's what I had been begging for. When Christmas comes around, please get me a pair of purple docs. But my mom was like, "Purple, Blaine? You won't be able to wear those with anything. If I'm going to spend all this money on a pair of Dr. Martens, they're going to be black." But I was convinced that she was going to get me a pair of purple docs now more than ever, because she had lied to my cousin and said that I had a pair of purple docs. And, obviously she wanted to help me with the lie, but she did end up getting me a pair of black docs. And it was a gift that they let me open on Christmas Eve because I just would not shut up about these docs. Because, you probably witnessed or observed that I'm a very obsessive person. And so on Christmas Eve, I think to shut me up and to let me sleep, because they, wanted to get to bed at some point and put the rest of the gifts under the tree, they let me open that early. And the older brother I mentioned, we shared a room. And so when I opened the gift, I was so excited that I had to wear them to bed. Like, it was that kind of, like I said, fanaticism. And I still remember the look on my brother's face. It's like, you probably remember that meme, what's the little girl's name? Chloe, when her sister finds out she's going to Disneyland and starts crying, and this little girl's just like, my brother the whole time, because like I said, we shared a room. So here I am, like, climbing up to the top bunk, because he was on the bottom and I was on the top bunk. So she looks really good in this. What was I saying? Yeah, so I was climbing up to the top bunk, and he's like, "Blaine, don't wear those to bed. You look so stupid." But I did not care. I felt not stupid at all. So that is like one of the best gifts I ever had or ever received from my family. And that's to say a lot, because as I mentioned already, they really did figure out how to spoil us every Christmas. And now, how does she hold this purse? Maybe I need an elastic band. So for the last story, I'm going to have to jump ahead a couple more years, because I went from being like, I don't know, 4 to 12. And now I'm going to be, so this story, it's going to sound, as I start telling the story, it's going to sound like a dark time, but I want to just, preface it by saying it was not at all. It was a very empowering time, if anything. I've mentioned on here, when I've talked about my Onika custom, I put it on her backward. I have a custom in Nikki and Isabel's world. She's like a best friend doll to Nikki named Onika. And I said that their friendship is based on a friendship I had when I was 16. So I'm going to tell the sort of story around the Christmas I spent living in a youth shelter. And I know how that sounds, just like bluntly said like that, but that's why I wanted to give it a little preface. Now, I know it's kind of abrupt, so I may need a little bit of background as to why I was in a youth shelter when I was 16. I ended up leaving. I left home at 16 years old. Like, as soon as you can't, in where I live, like Canada, Toronto, Canada, you can't leave home until you're 16. You legally can't leave. So as soon as I turned 16, because it wasn't safe at home, it's like, I mentioned to my mom, her memory kind of going, and she's been through it, and I'm not saying that she can't. It's not my story to tell, but it is, because she's my mom, and what she went through, we went through with her. And so her, as much as enjoyable and warm of a person as she is, she has bad taste in men. Let's just say it that way. So when I was 16, and so another thing is, I've always been the person who, if I don't like something, I'm like, no, I don't like this, and I'm standing up for myself. And my sister says, it has to do with my sexuality, because I always didn't fit in. I never felt the need to say, okay, I'll go along with this, because I never fit in with anybody. So it was like, anytime something rubbed me the wrong way, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. So that's sort of why, making sure this is still on, because it's a lot of talking. Let me get back to that. First, I want to say that this is a custom Tiana, and I'm about to take her out of this outfit that is so beautiful. So I just want to give her a little moment before I put her in my very, very favorite American Girl outfit. See, I wanted to, last time I put this on a doll on here, it was on a Claudie Mold doll, but now because the doll is blonde in I think it's 102, because it's a blonde doll, I want to see it on a blonde Claudie, just to see how I feel about it, because, my favorite mold, my favorite outfit, it's gotta be. And I just wanted to show, she's the only one I left in like her full outfit, because, I wanted to show it off. So yeah, because I always was bold and, never took crap. It's not even that I never took crap. It's just that I didn't understand the concept of it. Like, if I'm not enjoying myself, why am I just going along for the ride? So I ended up leaving home at 16, literally had nowhere to go, but it, for me, felt like a safer option than what I was living in at that time. And I literally had nowhere to go, and it's like, this is what ended up bringing me to a shelter, to get to the part of the story, one of the most beautiful Christmases I've ever had. I swear I'm getting there. And even at this point, even though it sounds very dreadful, it really wasn't. It was, I had said enough. I'm leaving. You can't stop me. I was like fierce or whatever. And so before I made it to the shelter, I went through like quite a few things to get there. There was the first thing I did was, it was the middle of summer, so I lived in a school park. And this is, how much of this do I need to tell? I'm trying to streamline it. So I lived in a school park for a bit, and then school started back up, so I couldn't use the school park anymore, because, kids were now using the jungle gym I was sleeping on. And luckily word spread through, word of mouth, as in, I did have friends in the neighborhood. And so one girl found out, broke her heart. And even though I'm saying this was not a bad time in my life at all, it's not something I would wish on another 16-year-old. Like, adult me is like, oh, that's a lot. And I can't get this chain off her neck. Oh no. I should have at least taken this off. What's going to happen? Am I going to have to rip it? No. Okay, I almost got it. 1 second. So a girl found out, she was like a year or two older than I was, and she found out what I was living like. So she asked her mom if I could spend the night. I was fighting with my mom, and she didn't want to spring it on her that I was literally homeless. Like, I brought home a stray, mom, can we keep him? But that's what ended up happening ultimately. After a few days, her mom was just like, what's going on? He hasn't called his mom, and I feel like if he were going home, we would have heard more about it. So this is another thing I want to say about how it sounds like a dark time, but it's not, because I always had these things looking out for me. People were always, I always had somebody on my side. Like, even though things weren't great at home, that was just at home. Everywhere else, I felt safe. Like, this is why. People would see this like young child, and I looked very young at the time. I looked young for my age, still do. And people always took pity on me. Sounds really, really bad. But anyway, I ended up staying there for a while, few months. You can't stay like that with somebody forever. As much of an angel as she was, and she clearly obviously was an absolute angel, like the literal kind. And so, just want to make sure I don't mess this up with Velcro. Yeah, because I love these tights. So what was I saying? Yeah, so even though I feel like the welcome wouldn't have run out because of how wonderful of a human being her mom was, seriously treated me like a kid, got me back in school, got me a job at her office, like everything. And all of this, and she was legally blind. So it's like she already had her cards that she was dealt, and she still had it in her to, help this person who needed it. And I wasn't the first person she helped that way either, it turned out. But anyway, so one story I want to tell while I was living with her, just to kind of show why I couldn't stay there forever, is because, when someone's so nice to you, you don't want to take advantage of their niceness. You feel really bad if you go out. I had friends, who didn't live in the neighborhood, and I wanted to see them. And Halloween, one time I really wanted to see them. And so I went downtown. I was going to be gone for the weekend, and she was worried about me. She always worried about me because, I was living in the neighborhood and people knew about this homeless gay 16-year-old living in the neighborhood. And so people were often leaving like threatening messages on the phone. And so every time I would leave, she would, like I'm saying, this blind, small lady was following me to the store, making sure I would turn around and I would see her there. And I'd be like, are you following me? And she's like, well, I just didn't know if anybody was going to see me following me. I'm like, and what were you going to do? So as I was saying, total angel. And so when I would go, out with my friends, even though it was a different neighborhood, she just always had this like mother birdness about her. I guess it didn't help that, she felt like my own mother had abandoned me, right? But that's, again, I'm a totally different story, and that's not exactly how it went down. But so when I went down to my friends for Halloween. And this little side story I have to tell because it'll come actually back later, not in this video, but in my next holiday story video, which is why I'm calling this a part 1. When I dress my dolls for Hanukkah, this story is going to come back into play in a really weird way. So when I was on my way down to my friend's house who lived downtown, I was, not dressed up for Halloween. I was just kind of dressed like it was the 90s. I was 16. I was dressed like a freak. And so this group of girls got on and they were kind of freaky too. And so they all started talking to me and I was just trying to get to my friends and I was in like a good mood. I hadn't really been out in a while. And so this one girl is like, I remember her like rubbing my face and be like, oh, your skin's so soft. And just all these girls asking my name and, where I lived and what was going on, where I was going. And then at one point, this girl is like, can I take a picture of you? And I was like, trying to act all hyper, thinking she was kidding, even though I hated pictures back then. Like I used to be really, really camera shy. I still kind of am to an extent. I know, don't ask why I do these videos, but it's different. It's for my dolls. And so when she pulled out the camera, I realized she was serious. She was really going to take a picture of me. And so the only thing I remember doing is as the picture was snapping off, I just remember going, no. So I was like, that is going to be one ugly picture. But luckily, I'll never see these girls again in my life, and I'll never know how ugly I looked in that picture. No big deal. And so, as I was gone for the weekend, that's the part of the story. That's the only part I really need to tell. And I wanted to tell that in my Halloween video when I was dressing my dolls, but I was like, no, 2 months to come back to that story. That's a really weird thing to do. She's looking good. So, she was, when I got home, she looked worried, like I'd been gone all weekend. So it just kind of felt like this angel of a human being. When I go out, when I'm doing things, she's worried about me. And it's like, it's not fair to her because she's, just so sweet. And so I did eventually leave out of guilt. Whoop, maybe I have to take her earrings off. And when I did leave, I thought it was going to be to live with some friends who then at the last minute backed out on me. So now I felt way too guilty, like after all she had done, and then I left and was going to come back and be like, oh, my friends abandoned me. Can I come back? It was like, no, I had to figure this out now for myself. Everything happens how it's meant to happen because it was now cold out. Like I had left home left my mom's in the summer and then had a place to go throughout the fall. So now it was like it was winter and I tried the whole outside thing again, sleeping outside. I should have been a professional at this point. Like I did more, it was more than just sleeping outside. It was like I tried the sleeping on streetcars, on subways, anything to I don't know, prolong the inevitable of having to go to a shelter, because the idea of going to a shelter was the ultimate nightmare. And I think, my friends who had to bail on me, I think they were still bailing on me because they were like, you need to get your life together. And because people couldn't keep, what would you say? How do I say this? People couldn't keep covering for me or taking me through life. I did have to figure it out. I was going to have to figure it out at one point, which would mean going to a shelter, but it was just such a scary idea. So eventually, I woke up covered in snow and that was the last straw. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go to shelter now. I may not live through the night when I go to the shelter, but at least I'll be warm. And so that was the final straw that brought me there. Her head's too big. Anyway, I think if I took out the earrings, let me try that. Oh, her head is so big. Anyway, I'll figure something out. I think this Claudie has a bigger head than my other ones because I've been able. Anyway, back to the story to anyone who's listening. So when one of my friends called up a shelter. She actually not just called up a shelter. She called around and did a little bit of research to find out what was the best shelter in the city. like as if they have levels or something. Turns out they do. And so she found the best one. And, I will hand it to her all these years later that it was the right choice. It was tough love. And I never would have gone through that on my own. Like I never would have been brave enough, but I had no choice. But it didn't mean I was brave enough yet. So when I got to the shelter, because they had a 10 o'clock curfew, but I didn't know that if you're a new check-in that you can get there at any time. So I could have gone there at 2 a.m. and avoided all the stuff that I was about to have experience on my first night. But, trying to make curfew, I got there before 10 o'clock. And then, after I did my whole check-in thing, they said that I could, I could come back in 10 minutes when curfew hits. So I remember I went to the side, there was this building around the corner. This shelter is right downtown Toronto. So I pass by it all the time. Even to this day, it's like something that's still a part of my life one way or another. But before that, I had walked by this building so many times thinking it was like a firehouse or something because it's just so big. And so I ended up going to this office building around the corner and sitting on some steps and just being like sitting there for 10 minutes and be like, my life is over. I don't know what's going to happen when I get in this place, but it's not going to be pretty. I was picturing all these like prison movies I'd seen or, juvie hall kind of stories and just thinking that only monsters live there. I was the exception. I was the only one who was going to be like a sweet, kind person who just had to have, bad luck in life. So when I went back inside, they brought me up to my room and the biggest fear at that point was because I found out I was going to be have a roommate. And so I couldn't imagine who I was going to be sharing a room with. Like nightmare. I could be sharing my room with a serial killer. He had left home because he killed his whole family for all I knew. And so the supervisor brought me up to the room. He opened the door and I'm kind of hanging in the back. I need to change his strings. Look at that. So I kind of hung back while the supervisor stepped inside and said, I'm not going to use fake names because it was so long ago. He was like, Renard, which is the free bed? And I kind of peek around and there's this petite, like short, skinny black guy with bleach blonde hair. And he points at the bed and goes, that one? And I was like, oh, thank God. So, all this trepidation I had, all this fear, it turned out I was about to meet my first, the first other gay person until that point, openly gay person I'd ever met because there was no way he was in the closet. And so that's what ended up happening when I moved to the shelter was I had this, this new best friend who was able to, he constantly said, show me the ropes, with like living in the shelter and, being a gay teenager. He was a year older than he's a year older than I am. So I, couldn't have asked. And that's what I'm saying, where everything happens for a reason. And there was always I felt like there was always something protecting me in the worst of times. This was definitely one of those moments where I was not meant to check into that shelter until he was there. And, the day after his roommate had abandoned ship. So it was just the perfect timing to have this roommate, where we got to, it was just, we got to kiki all the time. It was like we would have lights out and we would just talk. Well, not all night because we still had to, get up for our daily routine and stuff like that. But so the reason this relates to Christmas, you're like, what? Wait, is this a Christmas story? Is because when I moved in, it was really, really cold and a lot of people, when it got closer to Christmas, because this is the thing, the reason this was the best shelter in the city is because it wasn't government funded. It's a Christian shelter, so it's run on donations and not a lot of government oversight, which was good and bad. It was bad before I got there, but I got in again at the right time. If I'd checked in that summer when I first went to live in the park, it would have been a very different experience for me in there, a very dangerous experience for me in there. But by this point, they had been forced into workshops to learn to be more supportive of different types of residents, if you know what I'm saying, gay people. So by the time I got there, that had been cleaned up for the most part. I mean, I had a couple experiences, but, having a best friend and, we just had so much in common and, well, we were a year apart. So it's not like, when you're 16 and 17, that's like a huge age difference. So it wasn't like, it was never romantic, but it was just like how do you say, like cosmic alignment. The stars all aligned so that we would end up being best friends in there at the same time. And so what was happening that Christmas, as Christmas was drawing near, we would decorate and we would do a lot of Christmas things. Because as I said, it was a Christian shelter. So, aside from the Bible readings they would do at night meeting, they would still, so Christmas was a big deal is what I'm saying. So, the people who we, I didn't know this when I checked in, obviously, but, we got gifts and, we had like really great meals. It was just a really, out of all the shelters, I hit the jackpot, so to speak. And so for the funny thing that happened closer to Christmas is the staff made it, because it was all of a sudden getting really, really busy, or like they had it, the shelter was so past capacity. They had kids sleeping on cots in the great hall, which is sort of like a big, huge living room, which is where we would watch TV when we were allowed to be inside if we, weren't at work or school or whatever our plan was, our routine. And so they made this announcement that anyone who hadn't checked into the shelter by a certain date, I forget what it was, but I was there for like at least a month before, they wouldn't get the gifts. So then we had like a mass checkout. So like all of a sudden it went to being empty. So it's like people knew that they would get gifts here. So people were checking in even though they didn't need to. Because that was the other thing about living in a shelter, was that you had people there for all different kinds of reasons. Some were just, so this is what I was saying about it being like one of the best phases or chapters of my life was, being around kids who I could relate to, people who'd been through bad things and, made my bad things look like not so bad things. And then it ran the gamut. So there were also people who were there like, teaching their mother a lesson for not letting them go to the party on Saturday. So they were checking into a shelter so that their mom would know that, anytime you say I can't get my way, this is what I'm going to do. I literally had a friend like that. So that's why I'm using that specific example. And so the Christmas, because it took place during such a great time in my life, it really was, is this supposed to be tucked in? It looks like it's supposed to be tucked in. It really was a nice Christmas is what I'm trying to get to. And so I mentioned, having a 10 o'clock curfew, but then we were able to get, allowed to get, what do you call it? Overnight passes for Christmas. And I think we have this thing in Canada called Boxing Day, which is kind of like Black Friday in America, because it's a holiday, but the stores are all open and everything's on sale. And now it's turned into like Boxing Week, Boxing Month, Boxing Season. It's just like the sales are just never ending, which is kind of what happens with like Cyber Week and all that too, right? So I was able to get a 2-night pass to go stay with my mom. She would just have to, approve it. And this is the mom who lied about me having purple docs. So obviously, even if I wasn't going to go there, she was going to approve it. She would lie for me is what I'm saying. And so I ended up going to my mom's for the Christmas night, and then Boxing Day I went and spent with friends so that I, had a little bit of freedom for a night, so I took advantage of it. But what happened when I went to see my mom, and this is kind of what made it reiterated what I had, leaving home and being really happy that I had found stability and structure in a shelter. When I was there, my sister, I have a younger sister, I don't know if I mentioned. Yeah, I did mention. She's 3 years younger than I am. And so she was acting kind of, I don't know, sad. She was acting strange. And the boyfriend my mom had, I don't know if I mentioned that, I said the men who I left home because of the man, it was her boyfriend. And he was not hanging out with us, so to speak. And my sister just kept kind of saying, it's like, she and my mom would be whispering. My mom would be like, shut up, shut up, shut up. And I was like, what? You could tell me, I have a place to live. You can't hurt me anymore. And so my sister told me that they were planning to move, and my mom's boyfriend didn't want me to know where they were going. So it was to like hide from me, because as I said, I'm the one who didn't put up with nonsense. And so, everything every time I stood up for myself or for my mom or anybody else, I was the bad guy. So, it was just it just strained, put this like big strain where I was like, oh yeah, this is the chaos I left. And so I got to, have that, as I mentioned, a night of going out and partying with my friends, because this was the 90s and they didn't really ID in the 90s. Not that I was going anywhere wild, but it's just to say that I think it would have been different if I had had this experience now or within the last like 10 or 15 years or whatever. So it's like I had been away from, because it was Christmas, I had Ricky, that's the name of my roommate. Not Renard is his real name, and then he went by Ricky. And I remember when I called him Renard, he was like, "Don't make me slap you. My name is Ricky, actually." And so, we had been apart. It was like the first time we had been apart since I moved into the shelter. So when I got back, it's like sometimes it is chaotic too in a shelter. But if I ever had moments of needing to get away. It was just being back home for just a night really reminded me of the not just the journey I was on or the path I was on, but that I had made the right choice. And, all that feeling of empowerment I felt was just multiplied for the next little while. And so that's why when I talk about that point in my life, I'm not trying to glorify homelessness or anything like that. But I do try to let people know that if you don't put up with nonsense, it's like, because, what happened after that, after the new year kicked in, the shelter, they had all these like vocational training programs and personal life management courses, because obviously if you grow up in a situation where you need to be in a shelter, chances are you never really picked up certain life skills, let's say discipline, even like a sleeping schedule and things like that. I'm still terrible at that, but I think I'm just a perpetual teenager in some ways. And so it wasn't just the Christmas that was wonderful, because like I said, we got, like, the gifts were wonderful. When Ricky and I got back to the shelter, we opened our gifts together. It was like I had this family member, chosen family. I guess that was when I sort of really learned about what that means too. And then in the new year, my life started getting on track. And as I said, we'll continue this story because in the next video, because that's kind of like where I left off. Things did get a lot better because of living there, and the story continues in such funny ways, and that's why I'm going to do. Sorry, I'm not distracted. I'm just trying to get her back on the stand too, and I'm not stalling, is what I mean. I'm not like just throwing out these empty words. I did always plan to say this. That part 2 will be me, maybe in like 2 weeks, a week or two, I'll get to finish the rest of the story. And it's the reason that I'm going to be telling that story, those stories, continuing the stories, is because it'll explain why, even though I'm not Jewish, I do acknowledge Hanukkah. Like, I don't celebrate it because I'm not religious and I don't know all the religious significance behind it. But there is a lot of significance as to why I acknowledge Hanukkah and make sure to have dolls in my world who reflect that. So I'm really surprised. It's been a long time since the number of dolls I brought out were the right number for the stories I had to tell. So yes, I will. Got to put a purse on her hand. I will continue this video in part 2. And I mentioned a couple videos ago that I'm going to do a Q&A. And at the time I upload this video, I'm going to post a community post on my YouTube Friday, tomorrow, from when I'm uploading this. And I'm also going to post a story on my Instagram for anybody who doesn't feel like asking a question, anybody who's shy and doesn't want it to be posted publicly and just wants to either ask, you can even ask for a shout out, whatever it is you want. I'm going to, so yeah, private questions or, shy questions, let's say, will be on my Instagram story, because if you respond to the story with your question, it'll just go to my inbox. And I'm not even sure if I will see who sends it, but even if I responded to on Instagram, which I won't do, even if I posted it, it would keep it private. And anybody who, I will assume if you're sending it to me on Instagram, you're feeling shy. And if you post it on either this video or, any other videos that have been up this week, then I will assume you're okay with me saying, hello, or saying your name, shouting you out, if you respond to this and make a comment here or in the community post that I make on my YouTube channel. And once again, my Instagram handle is the same as my YouTube channel, DisBlaine. It's Disney, so Disney as a prefix, and Blaine, my name, DisBlaine. So feel free to. I don't think you have to follow me to send a question. And I'm not saying this for a follow, because the truth is I don't really post over there very often anymore. And I don't even ask for subscribers, because it's like, do it, enjoy the videos however you do, and enjoy, if I were to post on Instagram. So yeah, you don't need to follow or subscribe, but you can ask a question over there. And I believe even if you have to follow me, I don't think you do, and then you can unfollow me after. That's all I'm saying. And so aside from the Q&A stuff, like I said, the next video to this won't be for a while, like a week or two, but obviously I'll still have videos very soon because I can't stop. So I will see you. Let's say thank you for hanging out with me, and I will see you soon in the next one.